I'm reassembling the carburetor after cleaning it. I know in disassembly, I had talked about probably getting a lot of replacement parts for this carburetor. What I found out was that this particular carburetor, the replacement parts are very expensive. Just to give you an example, this part right here, this rubber diaphragm right here, is actually sold as an assembly with this sleeve part right here. And this best price is about $90 just for this. So that's just plain ridiculous. So this doesn't appear to have any tears in it, so I'm going to reuse that one, even though the sleeve is worn. I mean, just all of the little parts in here that I thought about replacing were prohibitively expensive, especially when you started adding them up. Then it only makes sense to replace the whole carburetor, which there is a replacement carburetor that replaces this one that is available. The cost on that carburetor is about $370. So again, not going to bother doing that. So I cleaned this up as best I could, cleaned up all the parts. I did buy, of course, this spring that was broken. This is the spring that sits on top of the diaphragm assembly here, inside this cap. It goes down inside here. I bought that spring because I had to. And then I also bought this spring, which the parts breakdown actually showed this spring existed as part of the little choke assembly down here. But it wasn't there when I took this apart, so I'm not sure if it was missing because it had been disassembled previously and not put together properly, or whether or not they leave it out altogether when this type of choke setup is used. On this bike, it's a cable that comes down from a twist grip up at the top to actuate the choke. On some models, there's actually a push-pull type of button to actually engage the choke. So maybe when they go with the cable style, they omit that spring. I'm not sure, but I'm going to install it and see how it acts. And if it gives me any trouble, I'll just take it out. So, anyways, reassembling this, pretty straightforward, pretty much reverse order of this assembly. I already reinstalled the seat here for the float. I've got that small little jet in there installed, and the one on the top here is installed. I also installed this sleeve with the needle seat already in there. Now what goes on next is in disassembly we had several washers left over here, and this brass washer is the one that sits there, and then this jet goes right on there. These 4 screws are for the bowl for the carburetor. The long screw goes through right here. You can see that the other 3 are not blind holes, so they're the short screws. This hole, which is a blind hole, actually takes the long screw. Oh, I'm sorry, actually that's incorrect. The long screw actually goes here, because the long screw goes through where this bracket actually holds this low speed idle adjustment. Okay, the way this assembly goes together, of course this slides down in there, but the needle actually goes down through the top, so it protrudes out like that. But this little piece right here has to actually ride on the top of that. So what you want to do is you want to put this in there like that. And then and there we go. Now that's in position. This gets lowered down in there. Then that large spring gets placed in, and this cover gets screwed onto the top. Okay, I've installed the float bowl onto the carburetor. The three short screws are installed here, here, and here. This long screw goes here. It actually holds on this little wire bracket that holds the end of the cable that goes to this idle screw or low speed adjustment, which actually threads in right here. But before you put that in, you actually have to get this radio down. Anyways, what goes on here is actually a washer, and then this spring, and then another washer. So that's put together like onto here, and then this is screwed onto here. Okay, so that's how this installs. You can see that you get the springs and washers in place, screws in, and then the long screw in there, and then this screw right here is the one to drain the bowl, and that just screws in there. Okay, almost done reassembling the carburetor. Did remove this long screw that holds the bracket down for the cable again here, because I forgot to put on this little tiny washer. This is the only one of the 4 screws that for the bowl that has a washer on it, and it's because it holds down this little wire bracket here. So I'm going to install that, and then all that's left next is to put in the little pilot jet adjustment here, which that assembly includes a very tiny washer, a very tiny O-ring, and a very small spring. And the way that that goes on is the spring goes on first, the tiny washer goes on next, and then the O-ring on top of that, and then that gets screwed in to this hole right here on the bottom of the carburetor. And you screw it in fully, and then back it out at a initial starting point, which is probably around 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 turns. I'm going to see if the service manual that I have, that's kind of close to the model that I'm working on, has any guidelines for the starting adjustment on that carburetor. Alright, so now I've got that needle jet, pilot jet adjustment screw, needle, whatever, in place. This is as far as I can go with the reassembly at this point. Now I have to go outside and install the carburetor on the bike, and all that's left here is the little choke assembly, the new spring for the choke assembly. This is the little keeper for the throttle cable end, and this is the cover for where the throttle cable links up, and the 4 screws that hold that on.